Welcome back to the Music Lounge. Another great episode for you. MTV was not only about music videos, right? We had amazing live performances throughout our tempo events. But one of my favorites, which we're going to talk about today, was the MTV Unplugged series, which is a
So
historic time for
yeah,
MTV.
I don't know if they thought Unplugged would be as big as it became, and I don't think that they thought that they would get the artists to do it, that they eventually end up getting to do it. And this is a series that won some artists
Grammys.
when they
Yeah.
Grammys. They
Yeah.
when they actually put out the full performance as an album or CD, they won some Grammys. One of the artists, Eric Clapton, I don't want to say resuscitated his career, but it brought him back into more prominence than he had been for a bit of time. You don't really say Unplugged without saying MTV Unplugged. So it really is one of the cornerstones of what MTV was for the, first 40 years of the channel.
Yeah. How are you, Susan?
I'm adequate. How are you?
Good.
What I loved about Unplugged is that it gave you a whole new perception of a band or an artist, which we'll get into as we talk about our favorite Unplugged. But it was really a chance for these artists to prove that
That
they
they're
were
worthy.
that they're worthy. That
Yeah.
they don't need to plug in. They don't need amps. They don't
Right.
need loud sounds. Like they can sing. They could play these instruments. They can harmonize. They can
Yeah.
adapt.
Yeah. Since we
So
talked about doing this episode, I was watching some of my favorites and just reliving that a little bit. And it's like being in the studio with them whilst they're making art. You are so upfront. And I've been to, I think, one or two. The sound, and they're just so absorbed by the audience, and it's just stripped down, and the comfort of the surroundings. It's not some big flashy pyro stage. It just, to me, symbolizes if they were performing in a recording studio in front of friends.
And that's what I love about the setup too, because most of the time when you're watching it, it looks like, I mean, they really try to keep the musicians as closely spaced as possible too. Like it's not a big stage. They're all sort of sitting close to each other. It just feels almost like they're discovering the music again for the first time, rather than it being as you said, on stage with pyro and
Yeah.
lots of choreography or whatever else is going on stage. And even the audience is sitting so close too. I mean, that's how intimate it is, because they really try and make the audience feel like it's part of the show too.
Yeah. When you look back at the first bunch in the 90s, you really get that feel of the audience is just sitting with the band, and they're just performing acoustically. It was really stripped down. You had them do a few different variations of hit songs. One I watched was Katy Perry, which seemed like a very sexy jazz version of I Kissed a Girl versus what you might hear on pop radio.
Right.
So, artists really got to play around with the arrangement, and bring out something that they've wanted to, but maybe they were like, oh, this has to be a pop song. But this was an opportunity for them to showcase a different side of themselves as well.
So jumping into it, is there one or two, Andrew or Susan, that meant a lot to you, that you actually attended, that you heard and you're like, my God, I love this group? Or you heard and you were like, I love this group even more because of what I'm seeing and hearing?
Yeah, we were tasked to bring a classic and a semi-current to the table, right? There's probably over 200. I tried to count them, and once I get past 120, my mind goes, so I lost count. But there was a lot of Latin ones as well. So I think it
Well,
was big in the Latin space.
it really, I mean, it was also a show that translated to, all of the other MTVs around the world. I mean,
Yeah,
you could
exactly.
you could take a Latin artist and they could strip down their music. Shakira, I believe, did one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then they even, there were some hip hop ones that they really kind of stripped down. And I think there was even a spoken word episode,
Hmm.
which was very interesting.
Okay.
But the idea of kind of taking the music and sort of bringing it back to its original core, I think
Yeah.
it was a brilliant stroke on MTV's part to do that. And I think the artists who did do the show loved being able to sort of present themselves in that way.
Yeah. So we have a playlist that goes along with this on YouTube. We'll share the link. Some artists that are featured in the playlist, which we will talk about some. REM, Oasis, Jay-Z, 10,000 Maniacs, Young the Giant, Amy Winehouse, Alice in Chains, Katy Perry, and Neo. Those are just some that we're featured in our playlist. There's obviously some classics, right? Nirvana, just a classic. And whenever you see music videos or images, they seem to be from an Unplugged. But one of my favorites in my classic has to be Oasis. And there's a fun story in this. It was in 1996. They were coming off their second album, What's the Story, Morning Glory. They played about 2 weeks before the Nebworth show, which just took them by surprise with, I think, 250,000 fans
Wow.
in 2 consecutive days back to back, which broke UK history for record number of attendees. So they were coming off of a massive second album, the biggest show in British history, and then they got booked for the Unplugged. And Liam, a bit of a bad boy, was on a bit of a bender. And this is all filmed. There's the Unplugged documentary, which features a lot about this Oasis. Liam was like on a week-long bender. They had 3 days of rehearsals. He was coming to each day with no voice, wearing the same clothes. They didn't even think he would show up for the actual taping, but they're like, let's just go ahead with it. He came on stage and is like, I'm not feeling it. Noel, take over. And he went and sat up in the rafters, heckling to his brother. There was a little bit of back and forth on stage where Noel was like, shut up, man, shut up. And I think it's actually a godsend for Noel because it brought him as the songwriter to the forefront of being a lead singer. And the emotion that he brought to the songs was on a whole different level as the songwriter. So I think it played out being an amazing show. And the boys are getting back together this year, obviously. So that was a long time coming on them just not getting on. They didn't officially break up until 2009, but there was probably years of just abuse and fighting up until then.
What is your favorite song or songs that they did or that Noel did
I mean,
as part of that Unplugged?
yeah, I mean, I'm biased. The one I put in the playlist was Hello, which I believe was the opener. And that gives a little good glimpse of Liam sitting up in the rafters having a beer. But, they performed everything, especially some of the songs that you expect Liam to sing when Noel came to sing them.
Actually surprised that they went through with it because I would have thought that MTV or MTV UK would have said, listen, this is supposed to be Oasis and Oasis is Liam and Noel.
Yeah.
Like, how can we do this without Liam participating? But they did it.
Yeah. I mean, so much to cancel. That was probably the only window, And I think it was one of the last songs Liam came back down to the stage to sing, and Noel was like, "Fuck off, man!" So he went home. He didn't let him. He didn't let him back on.
That's funny.
But that's an amazing one for me. Right in the heyday of Unplugged, I think. The only downside was if you look at all of the others, and we were talking about having that very intimate feel, this was in a bigger venue. If you're in New York, it looked similar like a Radio City kind of venue. So it gave away the intimate feeling. It wasn't really there, but it was totally acoustic and stripped down. So that
Do
was
you think
my
they'll
one.
do you think they'll do anything like that on the upcoming tour?
They might do one song acoustic, which is pretty common. You know, Noel plays a lot of acoustic guitar, so there might be one or two stripped down, but the fans are there for a big show. You know,
Right.
who knows? They may do some other shows after this tour, you know, but I think Unplugged's done, right? I mean, they're not going to bring back that series in that form, you know, but who knows?
How about you, Susan? What was one of the classic ones that you remember or that, made an impression on you?
It's one of my top 3 bands is Alice in Chains. And everybody talks about the Nirvana Unplugged. Okay, it's Kurt's last performance. Like, it was definitely a moment, in the grunge scene. But I thought Alice in Chains did a much better performance. I guess I'm a little biased. Just like Oasis and Liam, this band, they partied hard in Seattle. They did a lot of drugs. They were coming off of like a 2-year hiatus at that point. Jerry Cantrell was a bit sick that night. And, Lane Staley was pretty deep in his drug rabbit hole. What I loved about this performance is that you really could hear the harmonies between Lane and Jerry because it was acoustic. And I think that it was a real defining feature of the band's sound. You had Nirvana that had a unique sound, and Pearl Jam had Eddie Vedder's low growl, and Soundgarden had The Voice with Chris Cornell. And Alice in Chains had, the harmonies.
What was the song you picked, Susan?
I can't pick just one. No Excuses, Heaven Beside
Rooster
You, Down in a Hole.
What we have in our playlist.
That wouldn't have been my first choice,
Okay,
but
good.
It's okay.
His vocals were incredible. Like,
Yes.
Talk about sounding so produced and crisp, but as his natural voice.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And unfortunately, I was about 6 months from, making my way down to MTV. I was still senior year in college, so I never got to see them. And they only played like 2 or oh God,
It was in New York.
Oh yeah. It was in Brooklyn. And they only played together as a band a few more times after that. And then Lane died 6 years later.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was an incredible performance.
I can listen to that album on repeat.
Well, and that's the great thing about Unplugged too, is like I said earlier, they released a lot of these as albums, and they sort of had a second life off of television. More people could discover the group or the artist from buying the CD or album or tape or whatever it was at the time. And it's probably difficult to find a lot of these full performances online, but you still have the audio that's available to listen to, which is really cool from a lot of these groups.
I loved how, MTV would cut the unplugs and like create music videos out of them and put them into rotations. So it was just kind of a nice, break from seeing like the fully produced video, and then they throw in an unplugged music videos, albums. Yeah.
In your programming time, do you remember airing reruns of Unplugged or not so much? Because it was all about the ratings then, wasn't it?
I think it wasn't just about yes, it was all about the ratings, but I don't think the licenses,
Oh,
the
they may have
licenses would
expired.
only have, maybe
Right.
they only had like 6 months to like air a full Unplugged. And like, you remember how like, sometimes like if we were doing stunts for the VMAs, leading up to the VMAs and like doing a look back of the best performances, like all of that had to go through rights and clearances.
Right.
We couldn't just air something.
Yeah.
So I feel like there was probably a time, I mean, I'm sure like whenever we had artists that would die suddenly, it was like, find out, okay, what do we have in the library that we could
Yeah.
play?
Yeah.
But
I
if we
remember
had the
putting
content
together
cleared.
blocks of live videos on MTV Hits, and definitely did a lot of a lot of unplugs. But
I remember when Lane died,
hmm.
because I was at MTV then. I think that was like 2002, and scrambling, like, having to change up the programming and see like what we can find. I don't think we played the full Unplugged, but I'm sure we played music videos. Like we did like a block of Alice in Chains.
What do you got, Perry? Who was your favorite classic?
So for me, I mean, I
There's
always
so many.
end up having a few. One that I remember the earliest liking was the REM one, only because I was so surprised that they had done it. Not because I
They
didn't
did
think
two,
that
didn't they?
they did too,
Yeah.
1991 and 2001. And actually that both of those, they actually did a double album release with both of those unplugs, as well as songs that didn't make the original shows for both of them. But for me, what it was, it's the first band that I loved that had done one. And it was exciting for me to see them in that way because I'd seen their live shows previously. And, not that there's a lot of pyro or stuff happening on stage with REM. It's usually four guys on stage just playing, but seeing it stripped down and actually in one of the clips, Michael, they do It's the End of the World, and he's like, I had to print out the words because I don't know if I can remember them. So he's actually looking at a sheet of paper as they're performing It's the End of the World, which is kind of cool. The second
have
one,
that clip in our playlist, and
excellent.
Also we have the whole REM Unplugged from 2001 in our playlist too. So
excellent.
Make sure you check them out.
And then there was, a second one. I was really into the band 10,000 Maniacs right when I had started at VH1 in the mid 90s. Again, I was surprised that they did an Unplugged. I just didn't know that they were popular enough or big enough to do it. And I wish I'd been able to attend. I don't know why I didn't, but I remember after it aired, going to the tape library, which was on the ground floor of 1515, and taking out a 3/4 inch of the show and going to our dub room at VH1 and dubbing it onto a VHS so that I could have it at home to watch and listen to whenever I wanted. And then I made sure that I got the CD of it when it came out. I was totally into Peace Train and Because the Night. And then in one of These Are Days, when she's, dancing and twirling around, I'd seen later that year, I saw 10,000 Maniacs out at Jones Beach, and they're playing, and Natalie's dancing on stage, and I'm, sort of dancing the same way she does, and the guy behind me is like, "Sit down, I can't see." And I turn around and I go, "I'm dancing," and he goes, "That's not dancing." And I was like, "Whoa."
So her dancing is kind of like a Guns N' Roses move. Is that?
It is. It is a little bit.
The move that you were.
It's sort of like Guns N' Roses meets Stevie Nicks, I guess.
Yeah.
With the twirling. So yeah.
And they were the moves that you were.
That's what I was. Yeah, I was trying to like mimic Natoli. I'm all out there getting my groove onto 10,000 Maniacs, and the guy behind me just burst my bubble, and I just slunk down into my seat and just sat there the rest of the show. It was very funny. I think it's funny today. So it's a good story. I have a second Natoli Merchant story. We used to do a show at VH1 called VH1 Honors, and she was part of the show. She grew up in Jamestown, New York, where Lucille Ball is from. And my roommate at the time was also from Jamestown, New York. His father was a dentist, and he was Natoli's dentist. So I saw her backstage, and I was like, "Hi, I just want to introduce myself. I'm a big fan." And she's like, "Oh, hi, I'm Natoli." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And then I was like, "My roommate Jerry's dad is your dentist." She goes, "Oh, that's so great." And she's telling me about him, and I'm like, "I have nothing else to say to you now." So I just walked.
Nice.
I was not used to meeting musicians at that time, so I didn't have anything else to talk to her about.
That's
So
funny.
those are my 10,000 Maniac stories.
Do you know the first MTV Unplugged performance?
I do.
Oh,
Because it's in our notes.
Yes. Well, yeah.
What is it, Perry?
It was Squeeze.
And what was the year?
I want to say 86.
You just said you looked at my notes, 1989.
Okay. Well, I looked at them before we started taping. I didn't remember the year.
Gotcha. I was looking through this massive list. I remember during COVID, MTV did an at-home format, and there was a load of artists in this that did this Alone Together campaign, which MTV did during COVID. So, you know, I wasn't really, obviously I wasn't working there, wasn't tuned in too much to the channel, but it was nice that they've really continued it up until about a year ago with certain variations of Unplugged. In my time there, a band that I supported was a band called Young the Giant. This was 2011. I remember I was the label rep for Roadrunner Records, hearing about this band that, you know, my rep would come in and just call me every other day. There's this band called Young the Giant. They're from, you know, the West Coast. They got this song called My Body. And I was like, this is amazing. I love it. But, you know, they're a new band. There was a lot going on at the channel. Managed to get them, you know, some MTV2 airplay, probably MTVU supported them. Label really pushed this band. And we ended up getting them with the help of Joanna Bomberg. They got the rock slot on the VMAs in 2011, which was nice. Slightly before that, if you see how MTV likes to support bands, we video premiered their second single, Cough Syrup, in a few months before that. Then they got MTV Push, so a big week-long campaign on MTV. And then a few months after that, performance at the VMAs. And then slightly after that, the MTV Unplugged. So this was all from like January through November on 2011, where we really had this nice long campaign to support Young the Giant. And I remember being at the show, very intimate, had that classic Unplugged feel. And a lot of bands, I don't know if every artist did a cover, but another one of my favorite bands is Gorillaz, and they did a cover of Empire Ants, which is a Gorillaz song, very melodic, and then it goes into an upbeat kind of thing, and they just pulled it off with such an amazing acoustic version of that song. So that song is also in our playlist, so go check it out.
I remember seeing them at the VMAs.
Yeah,
I remember their performance, and I downloaded that song.
Yeah,
I like that song a lot. But then what happened to them?
They got the Unplugged. I don't think they ever really truly broke to mainstream crossover. Even now, they're very selective to probably AAA and alternative radio. So it just goes to show, you know, you write a hit and it's a lot of pressure to follow it up. The lead singer, Samir Gardia, has a podcast and a show on Sirius Alt Nation. He brings in artists from other regions to Sirius, and he has a podcast. I've reached out to try and get the band on here, so we will see. Keep our fingers crossed.
Other ones that you liked, Susan, that was maybe more recent?
When you say recent, I'm going to say 2001.
That's all right.
I'm just having, I didn't really keep up after I left MTV because like the networks that I worked on were more celebrity news and, that sort of thing. But the second one that comes to mind is Jay-Z.
Yes,
and
that is a classic.
Yeah. So this is my second choice for two reasons. First, it was in the MTV studios, so I got to go downstairs and watch some of it. And the second reason is like earlier that year, we were in the programming pit. It was like a regular day. We were doing work, and my seat was like in the back right corner, and I turn around and Jay-Z is standing in front of me, and he's like, "I just want to shake your hand for the t-shirt you're wearing." So I was wearing a t-shirt that a friend got me that said "Big Pussy." So I was like, "Oh, are you a Sopranos fan?" And he's like, "Yeah, right." And then walked away. And I was like, "It's the Sopranos. It's the Sopranos." Right. Like, So I was like, "Oh, like this is the guy that was kind of thought my t-shirt meant something else."
Right.
So I started to like listen to his music more, and I'm not like a hip hop person. I've always gravitated towards rock. And Unplugged was, traditionally a showcase for rock and pop and acoustic sets. So, Jay-Z coming on really broke that mold by becoming one of the first major hip hop artists to perform. And
with a full band.
With a full band, with the Roots.
Yeah.
And that same year, Mary J. Blige, like just a few months before, just dropped her No More Drama album. And then she was a part of Jay-Z's Unplugged. So that was also a big moment. And I remember I got the CD. I asked the record label, I was like, I want to be able to listen to this.
I think the fact that it was in the studio, because if you watch TRL, you can just see that it's the MTV studio, which is so small and intimate. So for him to perform that off with a full band, and to me, he was almost peaking at that time. Like he had so much energy. His flow was amazing. Every song is like hit, 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 hit. And yeah, I loved it. I wish I was there.
Every time, yeah, that was the era, I think, when every album he released was like an event almost. I mean, at least at MTV, we treated it that.
Sorry, that was shortly after 9/11 too, right? A month, pretty much.
Yeah.
So was there a different kind of energy because of that in his performance, do you think?
I can't remember. I mean, I remember being there. I remember being like, "Oh, I like this. Like, this is
possibly though.
It's cool." But I mean, there was, look, we were all, I don't know about you, but I was terrified all the time coming into Times Square.
Right.
For a few years. So I'm sure there was.
Yeah. It might have added to the energy in a positive way.
So a few years after that, we were at MTV.com. We were producing a bunch of live performance videos with, big artists. And it was just stuff that was on MTV.com. And a lot of it was stripped down, not acoustic, but stripped down because we were shooting in very small studios. So we had people, we had a lot of like artists that were current at that time, but we also ended up doing MTV.com lives with like Kelly Clarkson and Green Day and I don't know, All American Rejects, and even with Kanye. But as that kind of progressed, and because we were doing so many that were stripped down, there was the thought that, maybe we could call these unplugged and they would just be on MTV.com. So there's two that I ended up booking. One was Amy Winehouse, which if you watch it, it's literally her and a guy playing acoustic guitar. That is it. And I can remember that day so clearly. There was not an audience for that.
Because
It was
I
literally
didn't
just
see that
no,
audience.
there was no audience. And we were sharing content with VH1.com at the time too. So she came in and she was a little late. I don't want to, say anything out of turn, but she was, definitely had enjoyed herself in New York the night before with her band. Once she started singing and once she was behind the microphone, once the cameras were on, it was like she lit up the room. It was amazing. I mean, it was so cool to just be there and be one of maybe 10 people in that room seeing her perform. And, obviously we know what happened to her, but to be able to have had that experience was, for me, incredible and unforgettable. We also did Neo too, and that was also a really cool experience for a different reason, just because it was really set up to be an unplugged, and we did have an audience. And at that time, he was actually pretty big in like the pop and R&B space, and those are two of my current ones. And I wish I had been around in 2009 to do like for All Time Low and Katy Perry and Silver Sun Pickups and Adele. That would have been amazing to see all of those.
Now, Perry, can I ask why there was no audience for Amy Winehouse?
Because it wasn't an unplugged initially. We used to do these performances with artists, just for MTV.com, and some of them were shared with VH1, as I said. And it wasn't until after we taped it, and because it was just her and a guitar player, they're like, this is kind of an unplugged. And so they ended up calling it that. And then we're like, wait, we could rebrand this whole series Unplugged, because most of the people are doing it acoustic or very stripped down. And that's what we ended up doing. But we only ended up doing it for maybe like 3 or 4 artists after that. And then they actually officially started to call it Unplugged with some of those artists that I just mentioned that they did in 2009.
Now, do you think that for me, what I think about when I see the unplugs after being in an unplugged is that the artist feeds off the audience. Do you think there was anything that could have been enhanced if they had even just a small audience?
Again, because it wasn't an unplugged per se when we booked it and when we started to tape it, it may have been. Also, I think she may have, I don't know if she would have felt a little self-conscious if there had been an audience there. I'm not sure. Just, I think she was happy that it was really just a camera at that time, just because I don't think that she felt like she had to perform for anybody else but the camera. So I think that's what made it feel so special. Maybe 10 of us in the room, and it was just a very special moment for me as a person who worked at MTV for 10 years.
I would have said that, Susan, that most artists would have fed off being that close to an audience. But with Amy, I kind of see Perry's point of her. She may have been a little intimidated. She didn't like the spotlight.
Yeah, and I think also it would have felt like a bigger production for her too at that time. Knowing what she told me about the night before, I think she was just happy to come in and have nobody there. so that she could just do what she had to do. And even her just doing what she had to do was still special because her voice is special and the songs are special. Then she went on to later that year or the next year, she won like all those Grammys, once the album came out and once it did so well and people really responded to her. I feel like I was seeing the birth of what was and should have been a superstar, and so it was a really cool moment for me.
She told you what she did the night before?
She did tell me what she did the night before.
What did she do?
What'd she
Well,
do?
I don't want to, sort of sully her reputation at all, but no, she
How much
like I said,
detail did she go into it?
She went out and she had fun in New York City.
Where'd she go?
I don't know where she went.
She didn't tell you where she went?
No.
Did she
no.
get any sleep, or did she come straight to the taping?
I would guess she probably got very little sleep, if any. And that's why I think also, had there been an audience there, it would have been a little bit more off-putting for her. She was a new star, hanging out in the city, and she had a good time. So
We think the Lower East Side.
we'll talk about it after.
Oh man.
So those are some of my unplugged memories. Like I said, I wish I'd been around for some of the ones that they did in 2009. But I think it's just such an evergreen type of concept and kind of type of show that it is something that if MTV wanted to kind of get back into that space, I would love to see it, like a Chapel Roan do it. I would love to see a Harry Styles do it or something. I think it'd be really interesting to see some of these young pop stars and rock bands that are out now trying to do the unplugged, because it would present a whole new side of them that their audiences, I think, would love.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
and
they should still reserve it for certain guests and not just make a show and just try and book everyone and anyone. You kind of started seeing that towards the end. There was a lot of bands that were being supported by MTV that they just gave an unplugged to. So it was nice early on where go ahead.
No, I was going to say one things though that in the history of Unplugged was when Mariah Carey did hers. Her first album had just come out, and I think she'd done a Christmas album too. And there was a lot of talk in the industry about how, there was no way that she could sing as well as she did because she didn't tour for the first record, and she didn't do a lot of shows, if any, I recall. And then the reason that they did the Unplugged was to prove that she could indeed sing live as she did on recorded music. And obviously, she was amazing when she did it. And again, that was another one that, it really transcended what it was as a TV show. It was sort of like saying, you know what, this woman is really this talented. This woman is really this gifted. This woman really can sing as well as she sounds when she's in a recording studio.
Yeah, it brought out some amazing vocals out of a lot of artists, and luckily there's still a lot of content out there for you to go and check out the history of MTV Unplugged. But start with our playlist, which is linked, I've always wanted to do this, below. So click that link below, should be below. Enjoy what we've put together. We want to keep this nice and short, and those are some great episodes that we've talked about. Make Oasis the top of your list to go check out. No, I'm kidding. Check out the Katy Perry, My Kiss the Girl performance. Very, very cool. I'm a big fan. She hosted American Idol. I'm a big sucker for TV reality shows and singing competitions.
Well, thank you for bringing up the idea of this topic for a show. It was
Yeah,
fun to
we're going to
talk
do more.
about.
Yep,
Yeah,
we will
absolutely.
do more.
And maybe in a future episode we will get one of the people who directed a lot of
Maybe
these
we have
unplugs.
someone in mind. Yeah, Mr. Alex Coletti.
So thank you for listening. We're always grateful when people tune in and listen to the podcast. Please share and like this on any of
Subscribe.
the and subscribe on any of
Yep.
the platforms where you hear or watch us. And thank you, Susan, for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to be here, guys.
All right. Enjoy your day, guys.